Welcome to the Doc Analyzes Anything, where science and psychology meet, and we try to explain any and every human behavior, including yelling at the television, but nothing is on.
So, how are you
Discuss.
just going to start the intro while we're already laughing about Brad's lack of professionalism?
It's what all the cool kids do.
So, we yell at the TV because we're delusional, or we yell at the TV because it won't turn on? Because there's there's multiple different layers here. What's going on?
So when I read that, I pictured somebody like a sports guy, a sports guy, yelling at his team. But there's nobody playing.
Like on mushrooms or something, just like watching the game that doesn't exist.
That could be a variable, yeah. I don't know. I don't create these. I ask AI to come up with what might be slightly odd, and that's what it gave me.
You use your computer engineering skills and design the Behaviormatic 5000 is what you really mean.
Yes, that is what I meant. Yeah, Behaviormatic 5000, patent pending.
Yeah.
If you
There's going to be a lot of demand for that, by the way. I can tell.
A lot of need for random, odd, slightly off-putting behaviors. Yeah. I could probably just think of some on my own too.
Don't
How are you guys, though? How's everybody doing?
Hold on. Let me do my thing. What are you doing here? And also, Brad, you done chewing? Can we move on? Are we good to go?
There's more to
All right,
it.
continue on.
I am your host, Dr. Steven Sparks, with my co-host Kyle, who's looking a little bit too casual today, Steury, and Dr. Brad, hot tub time machine Clements here.
Oh, you're gonna say hot topic.
That's what I thought you were gonna say.
Somehow the hat looks like it could be from Hot Topic, even though it's from one of our favorite breweries. But no, the background there, the hot tub time machine is what I'm feeling. They're like 80s, 90s ski movie going on. You're gonna race some jerk here in very bright colored windbreaker style snowsuit here very soon. I can just tell.
Come winter season, none of it. Kyle, do you ski or snowboard?
The worst pain I've ever been in my life was due to a snowboarding accident, and it was the only time I've ever snowboarded. I've never skied.
Okay, so it sounds like we're all gonna go because none of us know how to do it. And then a new cover photo is we get in the neon suits.
Nice.
We could just ask AI to do that. We don't have to hurt ourselves.
Nope.
We're not jumping to that.
Kyle and I
just scolded him for using AI.
Kyle and I are like 12, 13 years older than you. It's gonna be much harder for us to get up than it is for you. That's just rude.
I'll tell you what happened. I went down once. I skipped the free lessons, and I just bulleted straight down, down on I went to the very end, no obstacles, nothing going on, and I was like, that was fun. I went like 100 miles an hour, and it was fun. So I was going to go do it again. I go to do it again, and there's a little girl who fell on her skis like maybe 100 feet in front of me. So I have a split second to think like, okay, I've seen people turn, and as I slightly turn, I'm face planting, and the back of the snowboard, like my legs are hitting me in the back of the head like I pretzeled, and it knocked me out. I saw green and came to. There's a little girl laughing at me.
You're supposed to pizza, not pretzel. That's skiing.
You're gonna have a bad time.
If you're French fry when you're supposed to pizza, you're gonna have a bad time.
Next time you go, though, if we all go, you'll be better. And you want to know what I'm going to call that? Progress.
Yes, today we are going to talk about societal progress and what is progress, but we will not be making progress on the slope.
So you gave Brad a bad time. You gave him a bad time for chewing on food, but here he like seamlessly segued us into our topic.
He finally added something to the show after 9 episodes in.
Guys, I just got scolded too because I was talking about the occult thing, and then Dr. Steve said, wow, this would have been helpful if you included this in our occult episode. And it's like, well,
yeah.
All right.
Just a little too late, but no problem there.
Hey man, I'm just the lay guy. You're the smart one here. I'm not.
So do you want to hear why I don't ski? A very similar situation, except I did take the lessons. I was probably 8 or 9. Learned how to pizza and French fry. Doing the bunny hill, doing all right. I'm like, all right, I'm going up. And on my way down, I'm like, I can't. This is all ice. I can't turn. I can't carve. I can't slow myself at all. So I did just like you did,
Oh,
straight down the middle.
yeah.
And at the end, I'm like, I'm about to hit the ski racks going way too fast. I just turned, closed my eyes, and hoped that it worked, and it did. And I sprayed everybody down there, just shower of ice and snow. And then went a little too far and actually trickled backwards, fell down. And I'm like, yep, never doing that again. Put the skis up,
Oh, man.
returned to the rental, went inside, and just had my cocoa, and I was good. That was
Yeah.
it. That was I saw the life flash before my eyes.
Yeah.
But I also, like, as you're talking about going down and seeing the child, I almost see it. It's like going down the highway and seeing a deer or an animal. Like they say, if you swerve, you're gonna hurt yourself. You just gotta go. You just gotta go. So
Same thought process goes for a small child.
not in your car.
The snowboard, I guess, I mean, given the angle and the wherewithal I would have to like angle myself, it could have been a pretty gnarly ramp.
Well, what I'm thinking is, if you're gonna crash anyways, you have no idea what you're doing. Why not just try to do some like crazy like front flip and land back on the snowboard over this child? Because one way or the other, you're gonna crash horribly. But at least that if you would have pulled it off, it would have been amazing.
Except for the
That's
fact
true.
that when I do it, all they're gonna see is there's not gonna be a flip or anything. They're just gonna see me jump and then drill this child. Maybe I'll
Like
tuck
you-
my head, but it'll be looking like a half cannonball.
You just
like
clearly did that
barreling
on
through this
purpose.
child, and look at that. There's gonna be so much momentum that this child will be broken in half.
So it will look like you're trying to like a linebacker tackling a small child rather than you trying to do this magnificent trick to avoid them. Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Somehow make it sound like
bloodshed.
somehow fix that so I didn't stumble over the word magnificent. All right, it's on you, Kyle. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already fixed.
Oh, cool. So anything else going on? Anything? Should we start talking about progress? What is progress?
I tried already, but you can that idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to progress into our topic.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like whenever we're in, I guess nowadays it's always politics season, but whenever it's election season, things are coming up. You're constantly hearing someone talking about progress. Although nowadays it almost seems like some people are trying to revert back to times that seem better, even though they weren't necessarily as good as people remember. But we can get into that. But it's strange. Like, is there really an agreement on what progress is, both in terms of like the politicians, society, or are we just saying, hey, progress sounds good. Let's go with that. You know what I mean? It sounds positive. The general idea of progress in theory should be positive. So that'd be interesting just to like dive in. What is progress?
I like it. I like that because there's probably a different definition based on who you are. But then there's also, like you said, people who think we're progressing, and then other people who think like we need to go back to old ways of doing things. And yeah, it's an interesting topic. I like it.
And I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but I've made it pretty clear I'm not a fan of any political party. In general, I think we should, as a society, get rid of these parties. Just look at the issues, and then whoever you agree with, that's who you should vote for, rather than just kind of letting these groups tell us what to do. But I found in having those conversations with people on all sides of all the issues, that like most of the time people agree on like, oh yeah, that'd be great, we should do that, as long as you take out this idea of like, hey, you're cutting down my group or speaking against my group. You know what I mean? And so I think we may have some agreement on what progress is as a whole if we look at individual issues, but not when you're talking about, hey, I'm not really looking into this stuff, I'm just voting because that's what this group I always vote with says to do. You know what I mean?
So quick question then, with how there's like the two-party system and really like no other party ever has a chance, especially in something like the presidential election. Do you think people choose one of those two versus like some of these other like smaller parties just because of the simplicity that goes with
I think
two options.
I think it's so I'm thinking like a couple of very specific instances of conversations I had of some people who identified being quite right wing, and as you start talking about the individual issues, they're like, oh yeah, well I that makes sense, but I never really look into it that much. I just vote with my party, sort of thing. And so I think there is a lot of that, but then certainly there's a lot of fear of like, okay, maybe I like this third party person better, but I'm so afraid of giving this vote to that person and then having the party that I think is less evil or less bad lose because of it, that they follow the status quo of that. And so in Detroit, the mayoral race that's going to be coming up here next, there's stories going around that Duggan, who is traditionally or historically been a Democrat, running as an independent for the governor of Michigan, has quite a bit of support, but that the Republican backers are actually putting money into his campaign, thinking that he'll take away votes from the Democrats. Both will lose and the Republicans can take over the governor's race. And so there's always going to be that bit of fear. They're like, yeah, this would be great to vote for this person, but what if I can't do that? And that probably will prevent that unless we get a lot of people getting up in arms, arguing, saying, no, all right, we're all just going to say screw this and supporting, this one person who says the right things and makes a website, says, I'm not going to differ on these issues. This is what I believe. Let's just go with this. And we'll get into politics in particular more in different situations and analyzing that scientifically in the future. This is more just about the progress, but I do think there's a lot of that going on. And it's probably a lot of what holds us back in true progress as we talk about this sort of thing. A lot of just maintaining control rather than actually working towards a goal,
It's been such a painful realization for me. Like in the last 10 years, it's just so clear that money in politics is just an awful thing.
Yeah.
And I guess it ties into progress that we have multi-billionaires now who can just kind of puppet everybody around and create rage and outrage where they need it to be created. And like what are we even doing? What's even happening?
Well, I mean, it is a lot of the topics that people get worried about as fear mongering just to get votes, and the things that really should matter aren't even the main topics people are considering when they're hitting the polls. And so a lot of that, and it really is, you just have two groups seemingly just grabbing onto issues on the other side of the aisle, trying to gather votes rather than actually having any ideals on what the world should be like or what direction to move towards in general. And so let's start off talking a little about what historically kind of progress is. I guess we're going ancient history or prehistoric. What is progress? Because we talked about in a previous episode, prior to 12,000 years ago, we weren't living in groups. There weren't elections. You had the hunter-gatherer groups or tribes sort of thing. Maybe some trade interacting with one another, but we're talking less than 10,000 years of human history, living in these groups. And so at that point, it really just was grabbing food, moving on to the next area, trying to survive day to day. Oh, winter's coming. Let's find a new place that'll help shelter us, that sort of thing. And really, there was no thought of progress, even though that we may or may not have had the language to talk about at that point. It's not too clear without any written records. But even if we did, you're too busy just trying to survive and figuring out how to live than actually thinking about, progress for our species or for our cultures, because the cultures just didn't exist at that point,
Right.
And so you can almost certainly tie this idea of progress to the development of agriculture, the development of larger towns, cities, and basically learning to live together in larger communities where you had to start having these rules and like, all right, now, sure, life isn't great. We're still struggling to survive. We still have the plague going around, but at least for the most part, it's not all day, every day, just trying to hunt and gather to survive. Maybe you can start thinking about, hey, wait, I shouldn't be treated this way, or this isn't right. We need to work towards a goal. And that's probably the first time was maybe this idea of progress, even though that's not maybe what they were calling it at that time. Like you had people in different periods of time, in Greek and Roman history, where some were living extremely well and some were basically slaves. And so I'm sure that was probably where those first ideas of like, all right, we should have some level of progress towards at least the people that were not being treated well, thinking, towards some level of equality here, that sort of thing. And I think even today, people tend to think about, all right, ideally, this is how the world would look, sort of thing. But I think most people are still just going through their the daily grind, day-to-day lives, trying to survive today, keep my job, buy my groceries that are getting too expensive. And then you have the small other groups who, they have their reinforcers, or they find other people's reinforcers aversive, such as, the temperance movement, trying to get rid of alcohol consumption from other groups of people, or the groups that are against pornography, or even like we're seeing now that the pro-life movement is trying to control other people's reinforcement. And there's the idea that they are probably trying to move towards what they believe is progress, or their view of what the ideal world is.
Yeah.
But the average person, I think, is probably still just saying, yep, I just gotta survive today. Like, I can't even imagine what the world could or should be like until you really start thinking about moving towards those goals. And I think that's kind of the idea here, is if we want to make a better life for maybe us, but at least for those coming after us, we should probably be thinking about, all right, voting and planning for the future rather than just right now, what is best for me in the next year or two. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's testament to the fact that we haven't progressed as nicely as what maybe some people would like to sell us, because there are so many people that are just trying to scrape by day to day. Like, what progress have we really made if most of society can't share that benefit?
Yeah. And just with you saying that, it's kind of interesting to think about progress in a way, because it's so like circumstance, like based. Like, one person could have felt that the progression of how things have gone in the last 10-15 years has been hugely positive, because it's only benefited them, as where other individuals will see progress as even going backwards if things seem to have turned on them in a way that they have no control over.
Let's also remember, though, we're looking this in the context of American life in the world society at this time, where the news, the culture, everything just dwells on the negative, because sure, it feels like the world is just shit at this point. Everything sucks, nothing's good. And we'll probably do a full episode why that is in the future too. But when you look at right now where we are, it's probably one of the best times to ever be alive as a human. You know what I mean? There's less disease. There is, although we're seeing some backtracking there's more equality than there has been. I mean, maybe 10 years ago there was more, but 50 years ago there was much, much less. There is much less war going on at any given time. So fewer people dying through violence, even though individual violence on the street level in the cities may be going up and down depending on the situation. But we just came through a pandemic, and we're constantly painting this picture of everything being so horrible. And so one of the best times in human history to be alive feels like one of the worst, because of the way we think
because
about
it is. Where's the hoverboard that Back to the Future promised us?
Mine has wheels. It's not a hoverboard.
Yeah, that was never going to work, because what are you pushing off on? Like the physics, just you're either stepping way down to push forward, which would be really awkward, or you're pushing off of nothing.
It's called scientific advancement, Doc.
Yeah.
Read about it.
It's easy to be cynical now.
Yeah. I feel like I need a little bit more, like, why wasn't a scientist brought in to talk about that invention and how it wouldn't work in the first place? It's bothersome to me.
The rest of the movie, though, checks out.
Absolutely. The flying traveling car, the flux capacitor, all real things. So I think as we're talking about this, we're going to be talking about how everything sucks and how we need to be working towards the better. But at the same time, let's remember that really we are doing much better than our ancestors have. Our life expectancy is better than it was up, except for maybe 10, 15 years ago before the pandemic. Like, this isn't necessarily as good as it gets, but it's as good as it's gotten in human history, as long as you are viewing in terms of survival and ability to, feed yourself, clothe yourself, that sort of thing.
I was gonna say all of the variables that you mentioned are like tied into survival, like basically like staying alive. Like we have the ability to stay alive for longer periods of time right now, just given that there are fewer diseases, fewer wars, technically, even though there's terrible wars going on right now, fewer. But is that the only variable to measure progress by? Like,
no, I mean, and there's a lot of different ideas of what progress is, and we'll get into what we are progressing towards, whether or not we consider it progress in terms of like the positive idea of what progress is in general, because the progress we're making potentially could cause the downfall of our species, or even have more disparities between groups of people and more people being marginalized and that sort of thing. But thinking about your rights, thinking about equal treatment, when you look at the vast amount of human history and how hard it was to survive, even being able to have those conversations and not just trying to find your next meal or survive the winter, does show how much we have been able to progress in terms of life expectancy and finding out a way to live. You know what I mean? Like, sure. Back in 10,000 years ago, you weren't having those conversations because all you could do is spend your time trying to figure out how to survive. And so having these societal issues is a sign of us having progressed to this point, even though they're negative and they're not things we want to think. Like, I mean, there's a lot of people suffering in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. And so it's hard to think about, like I always say, the world's gonna end one day, so just try to enjoy your time. It's hard to think about enjoying your day when you think about all these people suffering, but at the same time, there's fewer and fewer people suffering on a daily basis over the long run. And so we should at least understand and find some solace in that we are, in that term anyways, progressing to the point where we even have the ability to worry about these things, And
I think you're kind of hinting at it. An interesting thing with how you're saying progression as far as like the length of life. So then at what point is it that the world will run into like overpopulation, where the resources that are required to sustain the quantity of people starts becoming a real issue? Is a interesting take.
And there's a lot of
we're there. Are we not there now? I feel like we're there.
It depends on who you listen to, which scientific studies you're reading. There is no simple answer to that type of question.
No, and that's why I don't know if I meant to phrase it in the form of a question, because of the fact that there's so many variables that go into it.
Right. But there is, basically the number of resources right now aren't decreasing just because, there's not necessarily enough resources out there. It is at this point, and regardless of what, people's personal beliefs are, the climate is changing. The Industrial Revolution, 150 years, basically, that we've had this going on, during that time, the climate has changed in what would we normally see about 10,000 years worth of change. And so that is why scientists say, listen, this is a real thing. We are causing this change to happen way too fast, and we may not be able to shift and alter and survive it if it happens so quickly. because now you're looking at people who don't have as many resources. It's going to be hard for them to find food and shelter if there's less land to grow the crops, if there's less water, clean water available because of drought and things like that. Unfortunately, the lower and middle classes are always going to suffer first, and the lower much earlier. And we may be overpopulated in terms of sustaining life due to the effects on the climate and the environment, but not necessarily the fact that there's just not enough food for the number of people here, or there's not enough housing for the number of people here, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so, interesting enough, there was a presentation at a conference. I can't remember what conference I was at a few years ago. And just looking at the numbers, just the statistics, the way the human growth is occurring right now is slowing to the extent that within 100 years, you would expect maybe basically humans to stop, by the number of humans to stop growing. That doesn't mean we'll actually have a decrease necessarily, but that there'll be basically one birth for each death sort of thing and trade-off. And looking at it as a broad view of things, changes in society, changes in the environment and the earth, it looks like potentially we are getting to the point of homeostasis where you cannot survive any more people, but not necessarily that you can't survive what we have, as long as we find ways to make sure that we're not polluting everything to the point where what we have right now continues to go away. You know what I mean? And so we seemingly, just based on the math and statistics, are moving towards that point where we're hitting the maximum that can survive here, but that is based solely on the trends we're seeing right now, and the idea that nature tends to find a level of homeostasis and find that middle ground, like this is the ideal or the maximum ideal level where life can be sustained. So that
another
is
interesting thing that I'll bring up too is, I mean, we're getting the longer lifespan. Granted, when that time comes, it'll be scary, but at what point do you deem it like you've done your time here and there's not much else to do? Because I mean, if I get to the age of 130, it's like, all right, at this point, take me out. I think I've served my service here.
I mean, I think that depends on the reinforcers and punishment available, because again, we're getting towards the point where some scientists think that basically replacing body parts, regrowing body parts, sustaining life indefinitely will potentially be possible. And so if the world's reinforcing and it's all good and we're all happy, then you'd want to stick around later or longer. But if we're in this situation where everything feels like shit all the time, then you're probably like, nah, pull the plug, I'm good.
I'm imagining we'll be like Futurama, like the heads.
Yeah, and even more than that, like if you we'll do an episode sometime about this. It was a really cool phenomenon, like study that was done, but there was a scientist, neurologist in Brazil who was studying basically how to connect robotic body parts to the brain of people who had spinal cord injuries so they could be independent again.
I saw that.
Yeah, and it was like one of our keynote speakers came and talked about it, so I ended up reading quite a bit about it. And it was really cool that, so the neurologist found out how to plug it in. They started off with like monkeys in the lab, and they're like, yeah, it worked, except that the limbs are just flinging around wildly, going crazy. So they had to bring in a behavior analyst to help train and teach and shape the behavior so these robotic limbs were actually usable, and eventually used as an exoskeleton, try to help people. We'll have to do some follow-up on that, but that's kind of where I see it would potentially go, where as long as the brain is viable some way, in some form, as long as the rest of the technology keeps improving, then you may just be in a fully robotic, bionic sort of exoskeleton while your brain is there moving around, and you wouldn't have to worry about your body just shutting down at the point we're looking at right now. But that's still science fiction at this point.
Is it still you, though? Is it still you if everything's been replaced? Follow-up question. Which body part would you have replaced right now if you could choose?
There is an obvious answer that we are all.
I'm not going to say that one.
I was thinking my toes.
I want to be smarter.
I got ugly toes, so
I
don't know why you guys laugh.
sciatic pain lately, so we'll fix that. But
Cool.
what was the first question before you just derailed me completely?
What's the old like Greek proverb, like the ship of something? They talk about replacing all the parts in the ship. So like, is it still his ship or is it a different one?
It reminds me of like there's a place I think it's in Europe where the same soup is being cooked for like almost 100 years now because they just keep adding new ingredients, and so it's still potentially part of the 100-year-old soup, but you're also getting like fresh stuff in, so it's never going bad.
Can you eat it? You can eat it?
Oh yeah, no, like it's just like ongoing cooking all the time, and like it's just the same kind of batch sort of thing. I would love to try that. I just want to see what it's like, but
you get the plague or something.
Yeah, just dip that ladle real deep down there. Let me get some of the old stuff.
Sir, no one dips that deep.
I'm just thinking about like we should all vow if this happens, I'll become the modern day RoboCop.
I'd hire you.
I would not, but I know you better. So.
That's all we need right now is like more technology for cops.
To get back to your question, though, I think that is we're just going to leave it that I've been talking about it, planning it, been told maybe it's a little bit too theoretical, too deep. Save it until we have people that aren't going to just jump ship because of how crazy we're getting. But we will have a full, long, maybe multi-part discussion on what is the self, what makes us, because it's not as simple as like, hey, I'm in here. There's someone in here pulling the strings. That's what we are. You know, are you yourself if you don't have the language to talk and think about yourself as being yourself? At that point, then it is really just a phenomenon based on our ability to have language. And is there even such thing as the self in terms of, are you really yourself at that point if the technology keeps going that way? You know what I mean? So
is a bunch of molecules bumping into other molecules?
Pretty much. And like, if you have
there is a hamster on a wheel inside me that's keeping me going.
That's true. I've seen that hamster.
Yeah, we have to feed it every once in a while. But like under that same level of discussion, then if you have a severe traumatic brain injury, would you still be you if your personality and your thoughts and your memories have completely changed based on that? And so we'll get into that in the future, but that is an interesting thought of like, are you still you if you keep replacing parts, sort of thing.
Asking the big questions here, Steve.
That one I've been thinking about since I was like a kid. Like, what if I was born to different parents? Would I still be me? And then as I learn more about the science, I'm like, I don't know if I really am me or if this is just a accumulation of stuff that's created this monster. You know what I mean? This is just what's happened. And so we'll do that deep dive. As you can imagine, little 6-year-old Steve having those existential thoughts of like, what am I? Late at night as he couldn't sleep, because that was what was happening. It's probably why
oh man,
Dr. Steve is actually just Mr. Hyde in reality all the time. There is actually no doctor to him.
No, there's
yeah. I just went to bed wondering why the Power Rangers just didn't use their big robots to step on the bad guys when they were little, and they just win the fights. They always match the size.
I couldn't do the Power Rangers because they just flailed around wildly instead of actually doing anything that made sense to me. So
they were practicing kung fu, Steve, and I don't like you explaining it that way.
Ninja Turtles were much more believable.
Yes, turtles.
Yeah, mutant turtles
versus people in colorful costumes.
Correct, much more believable.
Yep.
So let's talk about like progress up to this point. What has it been? And sure, we've made progress in terms of depending on how you look at it in terms of like societal norms, more equality, although again it ebbs and flows. You'll make some progress and then people like, hey, that's too much progress, I don't like that. Or a lot of times it's not even they don't like the progress, they don't just like the way it's termed. You know what I mean? They don't like the acronym, they don't like the movement itself, even though they're fine with what the progress would have been. But as a society, one thing that has continued to move forward, at least since that industrial revolution, is the technology. You know what I mean? We are constantly moving towards a world where there's less to do. There's less work. There's more freedom in terms of your time, not necessarily freedom in terms of your ability to live freely. And that is something that, regardless of what we do, at this point, there's probably no turning back. You know what I mean? You have a lot of groups say, hey, you know, the machines are taking our jobs. We need to stop this. But even if automating things at your local grocery store or at the around here, it's a lot of the automotive plants, that sort of thing, remove jobs and take away the individual's ability to buy the products that these large corporations are selling in the first place, they're still going to see the momentary increase in the money they are making. And so they're going to choose that basically we make more profits now. And I don't know if they're not thinking about the potential of what will happen when the rest of society can no longer buy their products, or if, you know, they're thinking that we just maximize now, we'll have enough money and then we'll figure it out when it comes, sort of thing. You know, I tend to think that people just aren't thinking about that in general. Like taking it back to like current politics, and it's interesting that the current party is pushing for all of the tariffs because historically the unions, the workers, they wanted the tariffs because they wanted the jobs to stay here, while big corporations were being given tax cuts to allow things moving overseas or out of country, just to maximize profits. Like, on paper, the economy looks better when the big companies are doing better, even though as a society, we import way more than we export. And so if you don't have the people here that are able to buy those products, then sales are going to drop 10 years from now or 5 years from now, even though it looks better now.
Right.
But now it's been 30, 40, 50 years since this process started. And so, yeah, on paper, it's like, great. Yep. Let's try to move those jobs back here so there's more work for people and it's better for our economy, except there's no infrastructure. There's no plants to produce the parts to build the cars here. And so now we're increasing prices rather than actually helping the society with maintain those jobs. You know what I mean? And so regardless of what we do at this point, we are going to be moving this direction of there's going to be less work. There's going to be more automation. And just think about how far we went from, you know, Henry Ford starting the assembly line to now we have AI writing like students' term papers for them and doing too bad Chad's not here today. I call him out for his wedding vows for being generated by something along the lines of Chat GPT.
Oh, you know, were they really?
I called him out for it because I actually performed his wedding, and he's like, "Oh no!" That afterwards, he's like, "Dude, don't call me out like that." I'm like, "Aha, I knew it."
I like the nickname Too Bad Chad.
We'll have to use that. So progress, whether or not it's truly progress right now, and I'll add also, is it really a good idea from a societal standpoint to maintain unnecessary jobs just to have jobs for people to make that money? Or do we need to look at, you know, shifting our society to encompass it and plan for the fact that there will just be fewer jobs in the future? You know what I mean? At this point, we're basically getting rid of the middle class. There's either going to be upper class and those that are suffering, and eventually you'd think either we're going to end up in some level of like the Hunger Games or some sort of like, you know, civil war again, because people are going to be suffering so much, or it continues so long that now even the rich are starting to suffer because there's no one able to buy their products anymore. You know, at some point, if you go automation forever to the point where now there are no more jobs and no more people to buy the products, it cannot sustain long terms. And maybe we're talking a generation or two, maybe a couple hundred years, maybe during our lifetime. It depends on how quickly things continue to progress in terms of technology. But at this point, it seems silly to try to fight for maintaining jobs just for the sake of jobs, rather than trying to take the time we have left before all these changes occur and try to design society in a way that's sustainable with less work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The current administration too, I think, has made it really clear that, like, they see people in need as a burden on progress, as opposed to like helping people in need being a sign of progress. Does that make sense? Like, I
Yeah.
think like with like Medicaid cuts and things like that, it's really clear, not to mention like pretty much every other policy, but like it's pretty clear that like priority is not, as far as determining what progress is, at least people living in poverty is not necessarily a big deal, as long as the corporations and rich people have what they need. Thus, that's their side of progress. Does that make sense?
Which I feel like with how we've seen in history, like, has there actually been a ton of progress then? Because that's always been the case. Like, and we've seen it.
And that's what I'm getting at. Is I kind of said it like, well, how far are we really? Like, my definition of progression would be, like, kind of based on like the stats, like of like poverty stats, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
poverty stats have remained unchanged or have gotten worse. So how much have we really progressed?
Well, and that's what I'm saying is the progression we're seeing, the progress we're making is not necessarily positive. We don't, if you're thinking about progress in terms of being a positive thing, then we are not making progress, but we are progressing as a society in one direction, regardless of whether or not it is positive or not. And I never can tell with politicians if they're not really thinking thoroughly about the issues, or if they're trying to just swing things for, support. But you see people like Elon Musk, who, whether he was really just trying to say the right things to get people to buy his cars, or really he believed in the things he used to talk about compared to what he talks about now that he's, as wealthy as he is, and went very much from like sustainability, worrying about the environment, trying to fix things, to, hey, we need more people on this earth, even though it may destroy our planet, because basically what I think he figured out is the economy cannot sustain the way it is without growth. It requires growth. If it stagnates, then it either falters, or there just is no reason to invest, because you're not making any money. A lot of the money that people do make in the stock market is just basically inflation, or the amount of money that would exponentially grow just by having that money in your pocket, except it is exponential because you're getting growth on top of growth, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the reason, potentially, if he actually thinks this deeply about it and didn't just turn into a horrible person over, like, seemingly overnight, is one, he just got annoyed with all the wokeness and his own personal thing with his child, which again was enough for me to get rid of my Tesla immediately anyways. But also the fact that he's become this person that has the most wealth in the world, and that can't sustain if we don't say screw everything else, just we need more people, you know what I mean? And so with what you're talking about with all these things, is it truly that they don't know what's going on and they're just following the status quo and saying what they need to say to try to stay in power? Or is it that they just don't care and they're worried about their own reinforcers rather than those of the society as a whole? And it's impossible to know if it is basically people being evil or stupid, or just, and a lot of times you can tell yourself a story and convince yourself of it, and maybe it really is you've just talked yourself into this delusional world where everything is okay, even though it isn't for a lot of people. So we can't really speculate on what the plan or the idea is, but certainly that is just showing how they're trying to mask the fact that this divide is going to continue to grow, and there's going to continue to be fewer and fewer jobs and less money for people. Some politicians have suggested, having a universal income. Everybody gets a certain amount of money just to survive, and then now if you work a job, do more, you can make more money and live a better life and access more reinforcers. I know I mentioned
Would that really work in like a free market economy, though?
No, it will, but that's the whole point of this, is if we
work for like a year.
if we keep moving the direction we're going in terms of automation, the free market economy can't sustain long term regardless, because there's not going to be enough people to buy the products to maintain the economy. You have to have people at all levels of the economy for the economy to work. You can't just have people who made all the money and now you're holding on to it because that money is worthless if it doesn't mean anything to the people who can't have it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so, you know, basically, would you just have a situation where everybody has all the needs met? You have robots and AI technology basically cultivating the food, delivering all the services, everything pretty much is done automatically. You have to have at least someone there trying to monitor, hopefully, to make sure it doesn't start going rogue on us. And now basically everybody has the same thing and you're good, but you also have to find some level of like being able to have reinforcers for people, because look at, you know, the idea of socialist or communist, like, you know, countries that we've seen at this point. And first of all, there's never been a true socialist or communist country. It's always been a dictatorship. And the fear that people have over these things are because we see them as the dictatorship meaning those things, not because the ideal of having the situation where everybody has everything they need, everything is equal, everybody works equally together, isn't a potentially good ideal. But also, if you try to
an exercise is when somebody accuses you of being a communist, to ask them, "Oh, what does that mean?"
Yeah,
they never get it right.
But that being said, if you tried to today be like, nope, we're switching to this because the economy, like the capitalistic society, is just not going to work, you would have all levels of society revolting, because even though a person probably will continue to live in poverty the rest of their life, that idea that maybe I could become a billionaire one day and taking that away would be enough to make them not want this policy. I mean, a lot of people are voting in ways that harm themselves on a year-to-year, day-to-day basis, because what if, you know what I mean? What if I hit the lotto and now that would be better for me? I should have the ability and the right to be that super wealthy person, even though I'm probably never going to get there. And they may actually believe they will get there someday. You never know. And so right now, if we're going to be moving towards this one way or the other, it's not going to be able to look this way in the future, regardless of what it, you know, the alternative is. You almost have to start shifting and working towards it slowly and have a plan to let the society acclimate over time, rather than it being a, nope, we're doing this now and you guys all figure it out and war in the streets, because now all those extra little things that you had that your neighbor didn't have, you can't have anymore. We all just get the same amount, you know?
Right.
It's not a fully thought up, you know, alternative. And one thing I thought about is doing kind of is it Demolition Man, where you get the credits or the fines for doing pro-social or non-social behavior. Like, all right, everybody has their basic needs met, you get what you need, but there are still other things you can buy and obtain that make you feel, let's go back to the dignity. You have dignity for that, having that thing that the other person doesn't have. And so, all right, you get 1 credit for opening the door for someone, 5 for helping your elderly neighbor or something. And now the rich are the ones who are doing the most positive for society, rather than those that are finding ways to either manipulate people or just finding the products that everybody wants. You know what I mean?
There's a Black Mirror episode about that. Have you seen that?
No.
It's like everyone walks around with their phone or whatever device it is in the future, and like, you know, looks at somebody, like they give them likes or like downvotes essentially. And like when you go to the store, you can use how many likes you have, like how many hearts you have, to like buy things. And like when you go to a club, they check out your profile first to make sure that you're like fitting in. This girl like spirals basically because she, like, I think she gets mad at her boss one day, and all her coworkers look and they start like giving her downvotes, and before long she's just like an outcast of society and has no recourse.
Most certainly you would not be able to let the other humans decide who was liked or disliked. It would have to be somehow automated. And I know people hate the idea of being watched, but let's be honest, like, we're already on camera everywhere we go. It would just having a program there, monitor, and, you know, having some set value for things.
Right. But
yeah, no, you can't ever really trust the rest of humanity to do the right thing. I mean, the fact is that people are ostracized all the time for things that really they probably should not be. And that description reminds me of I mean, my dad, extremely liberal guy, extremely, but also I came from a hunting, fishing, gun centric background as well. And he's like, I think everybody just should drive around with a gun. You know what I mean? It's just the law. And every time someone does something stupid or cuts you off, you just put a bullet in their fender. And once there's 5 of them, you can just take the driver out. You know what I mean? He was real mad at this person cutting him off. And he's like, now, truthfully, we could never do that because one day you're going to have a license to be driving my car and I won't notice those 4 bullet holes in my fender. Seriously. Like,
and that's the only reason why that plan won't work.
Right. That's the only one. No, but it is that same kind of thing. Like, what if you just upset the one wrong person and now they just put 4 bullet holes in your fender and you're like, oh, nope, I'm not. Now I'm allowed to shoot you. You can't trust people not to get too offended or too upset and then just have a campaign against you. It has to be some way controlled where it really is just based on that. And then, I mean, it'd be a society based on reinforcement rather than punishment, which might be good. But could we survive the smugness? I don't know. You know what I mean? Go back to that South Park episode where everybody's getting like electric cars in the Prius. And I will say I drive electric cars. I love electric cars, but it's just like the smug cloud coming into town, taking everybody out because everybody was just feeling so good about themselves driving the electric car. So
it's true.
I think.
I mean, not true for you though.
Oh yeah. I'm not smug at all.
Steve he's pretentious.
Same thing.
I am particular without being pretentious. I like my things. I like them the way they are. I think I make the best coffee in the world, but do I think highly of myself because of it? Not really. I don't think I'm better than anybody else, but still, I think I have the best coffee in the world, which probably nobody else in the world would like because it's so dark and heavy that you're almost chewing it. You know what I mean? You're going to feel your skin vibrating afterwards, but that's how I like it. So
you tried it. There was a lot of whiskey in it.
Oh, that was why my skin was vibrating. I think also, and we're talking about moving towards, I think the agreement is some sort of utopian type society is what almost that goal of progress would be, like fewer needs. Everybody has their needs taken, whether or not that takes work from one another, will depend on where we're at, based on the technology, that sort of thing. But Skinner talked about it, and I think we're getting at that a level of equality and your needs being met where people just aren't suffering, or at least as few people as possible are suffering. You may still have mental illness affecting people and potentially ostracizing themselves from society because of things like that. And you can only do so much. You can't force someone to do better, basically, or get the help they need. But that's why Skinner wrote the book Walden 2, kind of showing in small groups this sort of community that's based on reinforcement could survive and thrive. And his idea was, all right, you get more and more of these communities and maybe they could join up and create a full culture. But he recognized that trying to do this to an entire country would cause a revolt immediately as well. But even then, if we are trying to move towards this utopian society, is that really a good thing too? And we look at the trends in human behavior, and like we talked about also, the fact that the more we have, the less strife we have to deal with trying to just survive on a day-to-day basis, the more we have to get upset and complain about. Like the farmer in the 1700s, although there was a lot of rift between, whether slavery was okay or not, even back before those days. In general, those societal issues, that's why they had the political parties in the first place. It's like, hey, I'm not keeping up on this. I'm just trying to survive. We'll send our representative to go vote, figure this out for us, and we just have to trust that they're doing it for us. And so as we move forward, we have more time to worry, more time to get upset about things. What would that potentially do to society as a whole? And maybe if we make it based on reinforcement instead of punishment, it would be helpful. But 200 years ago, anxiety was just like, nope, I have to do this thing to survive. And now it's become like something that we experience and have to try to treat.
Yeah.
it may or may not be a really good example of a utopian type model because it is an animal model, and we know that there's a lot that translates to humans, and some things that don't, especially with you're talking about. In this case, this study was mouse behavior versus human behavior. Although a lot of the behavior analytic studies were conducted with rats and pigeons, so there might be quite a bit of overlap.
Yeah.
But it was 40s through the 60s. Biologist Jim Calhoun conducted a series of experiments that are now referred to the mouse utopia experiments. And every time they failed over a period of time. And the most famous iteration was the 25th version, 4.5 foot cube. Every need was met. They screened them all to make sure there was no disease issues, no predators. They just put, I think it was 8 mice into this thing, and within 19 months, there was 2,200 members of the society. And
from 8,
from 8, and so I'd say maybe inbreeding was an issue too. But I think at some point, humans, were derived from one and then a few individuals, and so that is kind of how it happened, just over a much longer period of time for humans as well. But yeah, 2,200 from 8 in 19 months. That's all it took. And at first, everything seemed good. They were mating, pairing up. But as the numbers grew, they started to see patterns that almost mirror some of the things that we're seeing nowadays. It was the males that couldn't find a mate would kind of congregate to the middle, become aggressive, fight one another, and just fail to thrive in general. And whether or not it's based on the same environmental
mice.
What?
Like incel mice.
It's exactly what I was thinking. It's like it really is, whether or not it's because perceived inability to find a mate, or if it is the fact that socially something was missed, and that's what they were suggesting in the study, is that some of these males socially just didn't receive the right training from the parent rats, because they didn't have to do as much because they already had all their needs met. They weren't taught all the same social skills. But basically it is like, yep, nope, we're just going to sit here. We're getting angry for lack of reinforcers, in this case, sexual behavior. And we see it now. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of negativity and horrible things said, and even it ends in violence sometimes. And so it could be a model of what may happen if we don't at least put the right protections in place. Also, in general, there just over time seemed to be a significant lack in interest in sexual behavior from both sexes of the mice community, and the numbers started to decrease from there. And it's impossible to know if it is based on the way society is now, it's just becoming more acceptable to talk about things, or if it is truly a shift in the view of human sexual behavior, because we know now that overt sexuality towards individuals who may or may not be interested in that is just kind of frowned upon until you've gotten permission or understanding that, like, basically don't objectify people. Whereas even 30 years ago, that probably wasn't considered as big of a deal. But is that a symptom of decrease in sexualization because we're reaching that number of, where we can't sustain too much more? We're getting to the point where it's easier to survive. And so you don't need to biologically, there's less need for humans to reproduce. And potentially, we see a lot of people who identify as asexual now. They're just not interested in that sort of thing. And we just don't know, was that not talked about before, or is this part of kind of the same progression that we are seeing
phenomena?
Yeah, from this experiment. And so with our ability to have verbal behavior and plan and talk about and creating the environmental contingencies to try to plan and shift cultural behavior in certain ways, maybe these won't be the same issues, but there is an interesting amount of overlap as we get to the point where there's less battle to survive. it seems like maybe we're seeing some of the same things they saw in these experiments, which is, I think, is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And so I think in general, we have to decide, we have to think about, is any of this really progress in the first place? You know what I mean? Sure, hunter-gatherer groups 15,000 years ago, we're barely surviving. We're fighting, there's disease. The life expectancy was extremely low compared to now. But if we are slowly moving ourselves down this path towards potential species destruction because of our huge societies and some of these progresses made, if we don't plan it right and start, doing the things necessary to sustain life longer, would our species have survived longer just living in that kind of whatever happens, you just try to survive for today type mode? And we would have had no chance to potentially, and I think that's what people tend to think of the goal is when they think about the distant future, is build a society and survive long enough to find a way, hopefully, to escape this planet when it can no longer sustain life millions of years from now, rather than in a few hundred years if we keep making it so there's no crops and no water. But would we have, as a species, potentially survive longer, basically, from not having any of this progress, versus we progress to the point where now we have that slight chance of surviving much, much longer, but we're also, to our detriment, maybe making it so our timeline is shortened significantly.
And to our detriment of like overall happiness and overall like satisfaction. Like we can survive longer, but in a kind of shitty way.
And I think that is what really needs to be studied more in general, is having your needs met. Is that truly decreasing happiness more than having to struggle? Like, you can't dwell on those things if you're just trying to survive, and you're really happy that you're surviving when you're just trying to survive. Is there a decrease in overall quality of life generally, not for a particular individual, one or the other, if these needs are being met like this? And it seems, at least the rhetoric around society, that is the way it works. But whether that is true or not is hard to know. And you certainly can't go backwards, because now if you purposely go backwards, people are going to not be able to handle it. And it would almost take something catastrophic to have to go backwards, and then most people probably wouldn't survive, and those that were able to adapt would be able to survive. You know what I mean? And so at this point, I don't think we're not arguing or even discussing potentially going backwards. Just theoretically, would it potentially have been better not to go this route in the first place?
Yeah, like on one hand, so like our kids started school, it's already getting phone calls about like sickness is going around, like your kids might be sick, and I'm like, oh, it's a bummer. And then I'm talking to like other parents, and they're like, if my kid gets sick, I'm home and I got to call off work. If I call off too much work, I might lose my job. And I don't have that issue, like I have flexibility with that. And that's great, but there are people who don't have my life. You know what I mean? On the same hand, though, and so I would see that as a lack of progress, that there are people who like have to figure out, do I send my sick kid to school because I can't afford to take off work? That sucks. At the same time, I have these privileges, and then I look on my like pocket computer with access to more information than any one person has ever had, like in the history of the world. And I'm like, oh, that sucks that I don't have that car, or like, I'm still unhappy.
Well, even more than that, and first of all, your weird ass Indiana lies where you start school on Thursday in the beginning of August, it will never make any sense. But
we gotta keep that corn going, man.
Well, it shouldn't start till later.
I don't know. I have no idea.
or you just take that time off to go work the fields until after the harvest. I think is what they really did back in those days. But even on a smaller scale, individually for you, the level of stress, anxiety, aversiveness of, all right, I have to take off to go handle this situation, where if it's out of your control, you had to go work in like you're having to go work in the factory in the early 1900s, and if you didn't show up, you were just gone and didn't survive. It's like,
Yeah.
listen, I can't stress about having to go get my kids right now. They're gonna have to figure it out because I'm not gonna survive if I don't just keep working. And so there's less potential anxiety of not having that choice and not being able to do what you have the freedom to do now, potentially, than having that freedom and that ability to do those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, I think it's just the different ways of looking at things, but the things that cause anxiety now just would have never had the opportunity to cause anxiety in the past. And the farther back you go, the farther, like, the less the things nowadays would even matter to people. Like, it's just wild to think that we are potentially helping ourselves and making ourselves worse at the same time.
It is. That's a bummer to end on. I get a little depressed.
Well, we mentioned that a lot of this could be potentially a bummer because progress may not be the positive thing we think about it as. But again, if anybody can take solace in anything, it's just the fact that your ability to survive and live today, no matter how bad things seem, is greater now than ever. There is less violence on the large scale, but it's more random, and that maybe makes it scarier. It's maybe a little bit less understanding than two major, countries going to war, but we're not being shipped off to die in another country like you were, or in our own country like you were at almost every other point in American history. You know what I mean? And sure, there are wars going on in other countries, but the scale of those tend to be smaller than they were in the human history. It's just the percentage of people surviving now to old age and having their needs met is much, much higher. But we also have to not forget about the people who aren't having their needs met too.
Right.
So there is a positivity there as long as you flip it around and look at it that way. But also, at any given moment, the robot overlords that we're letting take over our daily lives could turn on us, and we could be the ones providing the perfect life for them. So let's dwell on let's dwell on the positivity. Let's look at the bright side of life and try to enjoy our day today, even though everything may also be shit at the same time.